I'm going to pierce this design out of my bezel base. Then it's just printed on paper, and I've left enough room on both sides I'll be able to solder my ring shank on. So to hold that on, I'm going to use double-sided tape. And I'm going to overlap it so that the pattern won't come off. Yep. And just make sure we get it in the center. Take your time, get it right. Now this is a badger paw symbol. And to pierce this out, we need a hole in every one of these places. So we're going to drill a 1 millimeter hole in each one of those spots. Normally you punch every place that you're going to drill with a little center punch, but because I'm cutting this from the back, I don't want to do that. I don't want to dent the base in, so I'm just going to hold the bit still to make sure it doesn't wander. Yep. So every one of these spots that you're going to cut out needs to be drilled. Position your saw like this. Run your blade through the hole. Lean against the saw, tighten the blade, and you're ready to go. Now, as you are cutting into a point, I'll just show you this one up close. Cut through your pattern. Don't worry about it moving, because it won't. It's glued in place with the tape, and just cut through the paper. Now when you get to the end of the point, don't try to turn the blade in its own length and come back, because it'll leave a round bit on the end. So just back up and cut from the other side down into that point. Then turn it around and cut the back bit out. Take your time, saw carefully, because you're not going to be able to clean this up. You'll just have the pattern that you sawed out. So take a care. Get this all sawed out, and then we'll solder our ring shank on it. Now, as you're sawing, when you get to a complicated curve, just slow down a little bit. Make sure you keep your saw moving and slowly follow the pattern. If you keep your saw moving, the saw blade will turn in its own length. So there's our pattern sawed out, and we pull the tape off, the moment of truth. So that's not bad. If there's any little cleanup to do, put your saw blade back in and just scrub the blade sideways as you're pushing, and it'll act like a little file. I'm using a 175 high by 3.5 wide half round ring shank for this. This needs to be annealed, and you need to be able to wrap it around a ring mandrel with your fingers. I'll show you why. Now we're going to go from here to here with our ring shank to leave this exposed. And if we wrap our ring shank around our ring mandrel and we leave that U shape, we can put a straight edge across, or we can put this across at the right size. So I'll zoom out and show you. I'm going to do this an O. So we just leave our shank sticking up a little bit so it'll be even with our mandrel. And we just push this up. Now we know it needs to be this width, so that's pretty close. And we know it needs to be that height. So we can pretty much mark our ring shank where we want to cut it just by doing that. Yep. I'm using a straight edge because it's easier to hold it and mark it. And we just mark it on the outside of the shank because that's where we're going to be sewing. Yep. Just hold it on your bench peg. Cut it slightly long because you're going to have to file it. Check it that it's the right width for your ring. This one is. Now, I suggest that you put this into a wooden ring mandrel, and on the flat side, put your ring shank so that it's sticking through only that amount, and brace it against your bench peg and just file. And this wants to be perfectly flat. Make it a point to keep your file flat. If you don't, it'll curve this way. So now we've got that. It should, if it's correct, hold itself upright on the ring. And if it does, you'll know that it's correct and ready to solder. Now what we'll do is we'll put one piece of hard solder on the inside of the ring shank. And then, after it's soldered, we'll pickle it and set the stone. So flex where your joint is and make sure that your ring shank is straight up and down and centered. And then place a piece of hard solder that is the same length as your ring shank, and just snug it right up against the shank. Then we use our same neutral flame that we always use. Gently warm the piece until the flux dries out. Once the flux is dry, you can position the solder where you want it. Keep the flux warm. And I've just tucked it nice and snug up against the shank and the base. Now this I'm heating on the outside. I'm circling shank, base. The flux will go clear. And we want both of these the same temperature, otherwise the solder will jump to the hottest part. Ta-da! Shift your flame. Done. So take your ring out of the pickle. Have a look at your joins. Make sure that you have a nice meniscus, which is the curve. Now is the time to tidy up your join on your bezel. So around the outside with 400 grade paper on your sanding stick, then we're going to file the top edge at a 45-degree angle, like this. So you're just going to thin it out a little bit. Don't make it a knife edge, but make it a little bit thinner, like this, as opposed to this. Then, when you get that done, we'll push the stone in, push the bezel over. Keep sanding until there's no visible solder. When you have that join tidied up, hallmark the ring. Sand the bump back where you hallmarked it, because there'll always be a bump there. Now we're going to set the ring, and personally I like this little bench vise because, especially this type setting, you got this big flat area that sits down against here, and you got the smooth jaws of the vise to hold it. Now this is the first time the stone will have been in since we soldered it on, since we soldered the bezel on. So, push. You can give it a little bit of a smack with a piece of wood. Now I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to push with my bezel rocker on the edge of the bezel, with the edge of the bezel in the center of my bezel rocker, and I'm just going to push that straight against the stone, roll the bezel around, and it will push that right up against the stone. So go all the way around, and then come up at an increased angle like this, so you're actually pushing the bezel down against the curve of the stone. And then we're going to take our burnisher and we're just going to burnish the top edge So what that does is that'll make that shiny and it'll harden it, go all the way around. Now I need to go all the way around, but it's just those 3 steps that you need to know. Push your bezel at a 45-degree angle against the stone all the way around. Then increase the angle, so you're pushing down, then burnish it, and then polish the whole ring. Done. Now, if you forgot to file the top edge of your metal, if you have a hard stone, you can still file right up against it because the stone is harder than your file. Never, never, never use sandpaper. Ever. Sandpaper will cut everything but a diamond. So you can file and end up with this nice, smooth, shiny edge. Really soft stones like chrysocolla, possibly turquoise, iron pyrite are too soft to file, but any of the quartz-based or jade, you can file right onto the stone. Now, polish the whole ring and you're done, with a little surprise on the inside.